You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome, I'm Esther, Awoniyi. Many thanks for joining us. On the show today, we ask the question, how are online retailers navigating the space in Nigeria? You can join today's conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awoniyi. Now, the African Development Bank, the AFDB, says Africa's middle class is expected to grow by about 40% by the year 2060, while management consulting firm McKinsey & Company expects Nigeria's online shopping to account for 10% of the aggregate retail sales. However, the e-commerce space is not without its challenges. Sacha Poignonnec, the co-founder of Jumia, and Andre Iguodala, NBA basketball player and a board member at Jumia, join me now to discuss how the company is navigating Nigeria's online retail space. Thank you, gentlemen. Good to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Esther.
Sacha, let me start with you. It's been quite a year for Jumia. First, that historical listing at New York Stock Exchange in April this year. And then we had a series of events that followed that weren't too good for Jumia. Of course, that report that came out talking about how the whole listing was fraudulent. You saw your share price fall, etc. I'm just thinking, how has Jumia been able to take that in its stride so far this year?
Yes, it's been and it is a very interesting year. We're still, only in September, and a lot is happening. And I think, what is important is the company is doing very well. We have been reaching this very exciting milestone to be able to bring the company to a listed company in the New York Stock Exchange, which of course is a great achievement for the company. But for us, it's just a step, right? We are engaged into building a very exciting business which is touching millions of consumers and thousands of sellers, and that's what we are very excited about. I think we have also published our results because now we are public, so everyone can see our results, and you can see that Jumia is progressing very well, that more and more users are using it to save time, save money, and that's something that we are very excited. And of course, as we are doing this, we believe that we are creating also very good and sustainable impact for the continent. So definitely a lot of good things this year.
Okay. Andre, how did you take it then when it happened? From the listing and then that, little storm that followed afterwards. You're a big investor in Jumia. How did you take that?
Well, I've been on the board since the beginning of the year. So I've seen the numbers, very close with Sacha, and having conversations with him and the other board members. And this is a part of just any challenge in any business, overcoming overcoming hurdles and, striving to embrace those hurdles. And, being a professional basketball player, winning many championships, you understand the hurdles you have to overcome in order to have some success. And as we've discussed before, infrastructure in Africa, logistics can be tough, but with what Jumia has been able to build, a logistics channel to be able to overcome that particular issue within Africa shows that we can overcome many of the challenges we may face in the future.
Now, speaking about challenges, we'll go into that, but let's just start with, Jumia's, your model and your road to profitability. Now, usually for online retailers, there's usually that period of lag where you're not exactly making profit, and then after a while, a couple of years down the line, you turn a profit corner. Google, Amazon, Alibaba, they all had that experience. But I think I remember you saying, was that in 2016, that you foresee Jumia turning a profit in 3 years. So that's 2019. So talk to us about that. Where are you now in terms of how you're turning that corner?
Of course, and of course profitability is in our mind every day. And here we are building Jumia also for the long term, right? So our strategy has been to really create the conditions for our marketplace to be successful. And for that, we have built a marketplace where dozens of thousands of sellers do business every day with millions of consumers. We have built Jumia Logistics, which is the component or the tool for the packages to go from the sellers to the consumers, and Jamia Pay, which we have introduced 2 years ago for the participants to exchange money with each other. And I think for us, we are really engaged into a strategy where we want to grow the usage of Jumia, which is the number of users, the transactions that they do on the platform, the value that they spend on the platform. And as we do that, we are monetizing this usage, right? And here we have introduced a number of services that the sellers and the users can can use, and this is how we are generating our revenues. You can see that, for example, in Q1, for the first time as a group, our gross profit exceeded our fulfillment expense, which is very positive. So we are very much engaged into a strategy which is a combination of growth as well as profitability, while, of course, building Jumia Pay. And this is what we have been consistently explaining to our investors and to the market, to make sure that we do those at the same time.
Now, what analysts are telling us, I mean, they look at your numbers, what they tell us, look, what we should be looking at is your gross merchandising value. That was up in Q1 too, but they say that for it to be a sustainable model, for you to be able to sustain that going forward, you need at least, and also new active, in addition to that, new active members, buyers, as it were, you need to sustain that at least 25% going forward. Is that something? Are you on the path to that already?
Yes. This year we have given the guidance that our GMV, our gross merchandise value, would grow between 50 and 60%, right? And in Q2, for example, in the last quarter, it was above 60%. Now, the way we look at the usage of Jumia, and the gross merchandise value is one of the ways to measure the usage, is also the traffic on Jumia, the number of people and individual users who are spending time on Jumia, because that is for us a way to generate advertising. We also look at the number of transactions, not necessarily only the spend, right? So we look at all of those, and as we see all of those developing very well, we can see that we are able to monetize it, right? And as we monetize it, we're able to do this in a cost-effective way. So really, for us, it's really about the 4 pillars. Growing the usage of Jumia, and the gross merchandise value is one of the metrics, but there are many more. How do we monetize this usage? Through advertising, commissions, value-added services, payment processing fees, and all those revenue streams. How we are able to do that, of course, in a cost-effective way, and every quarter, how do we bring our costs down, and the development of Jumia Pay, which is a very important strategic priority for us. So all those, they go together, and I think we've been showing that we can really sustain the development of those 4 objectives at the same time over the last years.
Andre, let me bring you in here. Let's take a couple of steps back. As you're an investor, but I'm just wondering, what was the appeal, the attraction for you, Jumia coming out, and then you wanting to invest in this company?
Well, I've been in the tech space in the States for about 6 years now, in the private sector. In the public sector, much longer. But been able to learn a great deal before I got to Jumia on the tech space. And you have fintech, you have the consumer space, you have enterprise, you have biotech. And the consumer space initially attracted me for being a consumer, buying an iPhone. And Sacha talked about value-added services and how Apple has been tracking their iPhone sales for so long. And analysts have been looking at that as the analyst's main objective. But Apple says, we're no longer going to track iPhone sales. We're going to talk about value-added services on top of the platform, because there's so much growth in that space too. And sometimes we can miss that. So Sacha's right. But what I saw in this company is, looking at Nigeria, looking at Africa, my father being from Nigeria, Benin City, and seeing the growth in the country and seeing not just the country but the continent as well, and seeing how our culture resonates and makes the rest of the world go. So many resources here, natural resources here, and then I think Nigeria is 5th or 6th largest country in the world. And then you talk about just Lagos in general with 21 million people. There may be 2 cities combined with that much population in the States. So you see that those figures alone let you know that there's so much growth to be had, and getting the logistics right, which is the channel we talked about earlier that we have, and the infrastructure is going to continue to grow. And with technology being the disruptor, so many people are having access to cell phones now. You're having that device in your hand. It opens up so much of the world. And you think of the lack of infrastructure and how it makes our platform even more powerful, because people are able to get access to things they were never able to get access to before.
But with that being said, Sacha, let me bring you in. Obviously, it's not without its challenges. And when I talk to analysts, other players in the space, I mean, when it comes to the part about challenges, they remain the same. The logistical nightmares, the low penetration of internet, broadband penetration, mobile payment usage, penetration still low. And then, of course, there's this emerging other side, competition. We have other companies that are, thinking differently as to how they can, they're not necessarily online, that's not their primary business, but they're jumping onto that space because technology is helping them to do that. How are you navigating that? Starting with, let's break them because there's quite a couple. Let's start. The one I always talk about more is the logistical challenge. What is changing and how are you coping with that?
Yeah, I just want to, before I talk about logistics, in Africa, in our markets, there are about 400 million internet users, right? And sometimes I make the joke that when I'm in New York to meet with investors, the broadband is not even as good as sometimes in Nigeria. I don't know if, Andre, you've experienced the speed of the broadband, but it's good, right? It's working very well. So, just this is a small parenthesis. But
okay.
Logistics, of course, when we started the company, we realized that this was going to be a challenge, right? So we looked at how we could solve it. And here we have really built the Jumia Logistics with 3 components. One is a technology platform. And we have developed, for example, delivery apps for the riders. We have developed a lot of tools and technology for the last mile hubs and the delivery riders to really work effectively. Then we have partnered with hundreds of local logistic companies. Those local logistic companies are very good. They have very strong local knowledge. They have existing assets. What they were sometimes lacking was systems, processes, technology, and the playbook to deliver the e-commerce experience to the consumers. And that's what we have brought them. So we have really partnered with those local logistic players, and we have complemented that with a network of warehouses and physical drop-off stations, pickup stations for the consumers. And when we combine those 3 together, we have created what is a very efficient logistics system. This year,
despite the peculiar environment
very much.
In which...
And look, we've published the numbers. We had last year more than 10 million packages. And what is very interesting about this is we have about 50% in the primary city, in the primary cities, and 50% outside, and 25% in the secondary cities, and 25% in the rural areas, which tells you that we've created a system that works everywhere. It also tells you that a lot of consumers in those areas are using internet and they are accessing e-commerce already. And this is also something that we are very proud of because it creates inclusion for consumers who otherwise may not necessarily have the same access. If you're in Lagos, you have access to anything. But if you're, in more rural areas, you don't necessarily have the ability to find all those products. So this is something that also is very important for us.
Okay, Sacha, I'm going to ask that we pause at this point. We're just going to take a short break. Andrew will come back and start a kickoff with you. I've been speaking to Sacha Poignonnec. He's a co-founder of Jumia, and Andre Iguodala, NBA basketball player and also a board member. And if you're just joining us, Sacha Poignonnec, the co-founder of Jumia, and Andre Iguodala, NBA basketball player and a board member at Jumia, with me today, and we're discussing how online retailers are navigating the space here in Nigeria. Gentlemen, thank you for your time so far. Andre, you're here in Nigeria as board member, and of course, you will be meeting with some youth, some youngsters, talking tech and talking about entrepreneurship. Talk to us about that.
Well, you always want to have that, that duty of giving back. With Jumia and our largest market being here in Nigeria, and we talk about logistics and we talk about, how do we continue to grow not just the brand, but those that are directly involved with the brand and bringing in talent from so many different players. You also want to have that in your biggest market. So it's definitely important to identify the bright stars in the tech space, wherever you're penetrating, whatever market you're trying to penetrate. So we have a group of young tech entrepreneurs, and we're going to be talking about the different challenges being in the tech space, whether it be from growth, and one of the hardest things is funding, regulation, and finding talent as well. So definitely always something that I enjoy doing a lot is just really tapping into those bright minds.
Well, what is that one message that you would like to leave with them after your meeting?
Embrace the struggle.
Embrace the struggle, I like that.
It's supposed to be hard. Nothing's really worth it, and you don't really get that joy unless you experience those growing pains. you experience, you had to really test yourself and take yourself to those limits in order to get to, some say the promised land. In the basketball world, in the sports world, we say, you have to win the championships. But it's that breaking point. Do you break, or do you find a way to get through it and get to the other side first?
Have you heard, because usually, when we talk about the Nigerian tech space, we talk about entrepreneurs within this space. What is usually said is that, for the Nigerian youth, for the Nigerian tech startup, many of the challenges are quite different from what, will be experienced if, say, the tech entrepreneur was in a more developed economy. Do you think that there's an appreciation of those differences? And do you think that that makes the tech entrepreneurs themselves come out on the other side even more stronger?
Yes.
Because of those extra peculiar challenges that they experience just by being in this environment?
Yes. Well, you look at it as, going through the struggle from a different way to someone else who may have been spoon-fed their way through it. We talk about that a lot back in the States in terms of the economic background a lot of professional athletes come from. Okay. The majority of the professional athletes come from middle-class to low-income class families because they had to go through that struggle. They had to go without for so long. They really strive for something. They had to overcome, working extra hard to make a way. It's just naturally ingrained in them. And you have the same situation here where you might have some hurdles, or, we have the infrastructure issue, or we're trying to overcome that, or we're going to make a way to make our distribution channels, or to, you might not have all the pages to your book, but you find the information somehow, some way. Those things kind of train you and help you develop and mature a little bit quicker to be ready for those challenges at a faster pace than someone who, may have had an easier road to success. Okay.
Sacha, let's speak it from you. We're talking about challenges. Let's just quickly wrap that up. I'm not sure we talked about rising competition. But many times what we hear is, Jumia has first mover advantage and it can leverage on that. To what extent would you say you're leveraging on that based, in the face of rising competition?
When we think about this, we look at first the opportunity. And if you look at online commerce today in Africa, it's less than 1% of the retail according to the studies. When you look at the same number in America, it's about 12%, and you look at the number in China, it's 20%. So we are in the very early days, and this opportunity is really ahead of us. So of course, there's competition everywhere. And to be honest, we look at more growing the pie than anything else, right? So for us, we see that the consumers today, when they look at the opportunity to buy online, it's something which is still very new. So whenever we see opportunities, or whenever we see initiatives from other players to convey the message that consumers should go online and see that as a good way to save time and save money, we honestly think that this is also a good thing for all of us, right? So because this opportunity is so big and it's so much ahead of us, and that's really how we see it. I want to come back just on one of the challenges here, and I think it's also something that very resonates what Andre was saying about embrace the struggle. One of the things we can say is that the perception of Africa, and sometimes also of the investors, is not always the one we would wish, right? And when we speak to the entrepreneurs, and when today we are going to gather with the tech people, we're going to talk about talent, obviously, growth, regulation, but we're going to talk also about funding. And I think this is something that we are very also committed to, and the fact that we can bring a positive image about the great things which are happening in Africa to convince more investors, more Nigerian investors, more Moroccan investors, Egyptian investors, and Kenyan investors, and South African investors, and American investors to give a chance to some of the great things which are happening here. And I meet with a lot of entrepreneurs, and look, there's an amazing amount of talent here in Nigeria, but in general on the continent. There's an amazing amount of grindness and embracing the struggle type of DNA. And sometimes what is missing is the fuel. And the fuel for a tech company and for an entrepreneur is the money. And that is something which we hope to collectively change, so that there's more capital which is being given also to the entrepreneurs here in Nigeria and in general in Africa.
I wanted to talk about, and this question is for both of you. Every day I talk to analysts, especially from from the consumer space. And the story we're hearing right now, and because you're operating within an economy, and right now the Nigerian economy is not experiencing fantastic growth, and we're seeing increased pressure on the consumer spending, on discretionary spending. The disposable income is not what it used to be, and we're still waiting for the economy to turn a corner. And I know that is also impacting on the space, because at the end of the day, many of the things that people go online to buy, apart from necessities, and things that not necessarily fall into the list of needs. It's the things that they want, that they want to buy, but discretionary spending or income is not what it used to be. So is that how big a concern is that for you? Andre, let me start with you.
Well, you look at it as something that you keep an eye on, but at the same time, each quarter you're looking at the data and seeing what they're buying. And when you see something that they're buying, we talk about it in the States in terms of you start in e-commerce, you see what your customer wants the most, and then you develop brick and mortar to provide that for them in certain areas where it's higher density.
Okay.
So you could talk about that in this space as well, and providing not just for the consumer, but you're providing a business for the seller as well. Yesterday we went out in the field and we saw the warehouse, and then we were able to go to the vendor distribution center, where vendors this is their business, and you have the conversations with these vendors, and you're saying, how did you start? Did you start on Jumia? Did you have your own storefront first? And the majority of them say, I started on Jumia, and I was able to grow my brand, and then I was able to have my own storefront from there. And you're like, wow, that's great growth. You're creating jobs as well. So that's a big part that goes unnoticed as well, and something that I was really happy to see in coming here, and something I wasn't expecting to experience is actual jobs growing because of the platform that's been built by Jamia and Sacha.
Okay, now, Sacha, for you, looking at your business strategy and looking at the impact and the slowing of consumer spending, does that get you worried? Does that make you go back to the table and say, perhaps we need to tweak the strategy?
Embrace the struggle, right?
Yeah, so embrace it.
I'll say two things. Number one, if you look at the prices on Jumia, they're most often cheaper than in the stores. So if at all, I see if the consumers are more looking for better prices, I think this is good for Jumia, because they will come to Jumia, they will compare, and I think that they will choose more often Jumia. So the fact that we have very competitive prices in a time when the consumers is more price sensitive is definitely good for us. Secondly, on Jumia, the consumers are buying a lot of day-to-day categories. They buy a lot of grocery. They buy a lot of household supplies. They also do airtime recharge and utility payment. So Jumia is not just for when you have money to spare, you go and you buy a fashion item. It's also a lot for the day-to-day. And a lot of our consumers use Jumia to save time and save money. This is what we have been really aiming at, to offer a value proposition for the consumers, where I want to hear them, thank you Jumia, because of Jumia I can save time and save money. This is why we wake up in the morning, because we want to help consumers save time and save money. And this mission, I think, is even more relevant if the consumers are in more needs to do that.
Okay.
So overall, we feel certainly very confident, because we've got the value proposition which corresponds to that, right? To really help consumers save time, save money. And I'm not saying it's easy, but this is really something that we are doing. So we feel very confident about the strategy and about the current value proposition for the consumers at this time.
Okay, great. We have about 3 minutes left. Andre, let's wrap this up. When you look at the tech space here, not just e-commerce, the general tech space versus how it is in developed economies. What we hear many times is that technology, some aspects of it can help developing countries like Nigeria leapfrog. What are your hopes going forward? As you look across the African continent, you see those key economies that are in the forefront of driving that onto tech, startups, the tech space in general. What are your hopes in terms of how Africa can begin to leapfrog? It probably already is, anyways. Leapfrog, and then just put itself on the map.
I want the continent, and to embrace it and not fight it, You see a few players, we call them the old guard back in the States, when they don't embrace it, those are the companies that are disrupted the most. And then they're finding their way, they find themselves last minute trying to figure out a way to salvage, their legacies because they didn't embrace tech. And I want Africans to embrace tech, to invest in tech and invest in our youth, being able to code, be able to build companies, be able to build with one another, and be able to embrace each and everybody. We can all work together to make this something really special.
All right, we're going to have to leave with that. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. I've been speaking to Sacha Poignonnec. He's a co-founder of Jumia, and Andre Iguodala, an NBA basketball player and a board member at Jumia. Well, that's it on Beyond Markets. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther Awoniyi. For myself and the team, it's bye for now.